Certain people are much more prone to PMDD, really important for...
Dr. Ceri is a GP with a special interest in female hormonal health. With over 2 decades of experience, co-founder of Healthy Hormones and a passionate advocate for women's wellness across all life stages.
Something in our medical training, like we're thrown in at the deep end in our early 20s, put on the front line that war zone of being on call, being on your own, dealing with these really ill people. You know, you're only a baby yourself in your early 20s.
The research that hasn't been done on women's bodies. And
women have twice the incidence of anxiety, depression, PTSD.
Can you just repeat that one for us?
Estrogen on its own reduces the risk of breast cancer by 23%. So PMDD stands for premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and it is a severe form of premenstrual mood disruption.
Hi there, I'm Leah, and welcome to the House of Hormones podcast. Dr. Ceri, thank you so much. As you know, I've wanted you to come on the podcast for a long time now, so I'm absolutely delighted that you're here. Thank you for coming on the podcast with the House of Hormones. For anybody that doesn't know you and isn't familiar with you, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Thanks very much for having me. I am a GP in Sydney, and we moved out to Australia in 2012. I used to live in Scotland, but obviously I'm Northern Irish, grew up in Belfast like you did. And over the past few years, I've become increasingly interested in women's hormonal health, particularly hormonal mental health, everything from PMT, PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, perinatal depression, and of course perimenopause and menopausal mood disorders. And that really came about because a patient came to see me and asked me to prescribe her testosterone. And I'd never prescribed testosterone for a woman before, or for a man, actually, to be fair, and realised how much I didn't know. And since then, it's just been a wonderful learning journey of finding out all the stuff that nobody ever thought to teach us at university or after university, and has given me a real new passion for learning. I love my job more than ever thought I could, and has turned me into a passionate advocate for improving women's health, specifically in the hormonal space. So I'm now a big advocate, a bit of an activist, and we have launched our own menopause education platform for both the general public and for healthcare providers, so that we really bridge that lack of awareness, poor education, and as well as a bit of advocacy work. So yeah, I'm living my best life in Sydney. Doing the hormone stuff.
That's amazing. When was that then? So you said a patient came into you, and that was really what changed your focus into women's health. How long ago was that?
So it's probably nearly 4 years ago now. So lovely patient who's a nurse, who very well educated, and had gone and seen another specialist and was already on estrogen, progesterone, and then had testosterone added in, and had felt it was a game changer for her, and suggested that I would upskill, and even had the course I should upskill in, which was Dr. Louise Newson's Confidence in the Menopause course. And then I did that and started listening to Dr. Newson's podcast series, and could really almost identify an equivalent patient in my own practice for every story I was listening to. And it has just transformed how I practice medicine. It's kind of baffling when you learn this, that you didn't see it before.
Yeah.
It's like discovering that the earth is round, really, and it really gives you a very different way to manage medicine, both looking at disease prevention, but also mental health. You know, a lot of female mental health has a hormonal basis, and it's not just about using hormones. It's about using, you know, all of the tools in the toolbox, whether that's exercise, movement, nutrition, stress regulation, sleep. You know, I'd already got really interested in breathing. I've always been an advocate of exercise and nutrition, but really going down to basics and sort of relearning why all of the same things matter for all of the same issues in health, whether it's mental health or disease prevention or cancer. You know, it's actually quite simple. We've overcomplicated it an awful lot.
I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. It does feel really baffling, and it's really easy to understand why women are so confused, because the research that hasn't been done on women's bodies and the research that we don't have to the things that we're finding out now, it feels mind-blowing, doesn't it? It does feel like this is, how have we not known this?
And I think what is frustrating is, although there's a real lack of research, there is still a reasonable amount that has demonstrated that there are very much biological differences between how males and females experience wellness and illness. There's good data there showing that women have twice the incidence of anxiety, depression, PTSD. We all know, anybody that's had a menstrual cycle, that our mood is different at different times in the month. For some people, it's a mild difference. For others, it's severe. But we kind of have known it, but haven't had a framework to hang it on, certainly the average doctor, the average woman. But I do think there are people that have known, but their voice hasn't been heard, and when you look through the research, there's evidence supporting the role of hormones from everything. There are studies there, but because of that fear of breast cancer, using hormones was really pushed aside. And they go, well, look at this. Estrogen clearly works to treat or prevent this. Let's make a new drug like estrogen. So they keep making new drugs instead of just using the stuff that we have.
Yeah, so many women feel so dismissed. Their doctors, like, we hear this a lot. It's really refreshing to hear yourself, and it's so refreshing to hear doctors say, I didn't know that, we didn't learn that. And like, so for yourself to be talking about how, well, it was only really 4 years ago that you went in search of more information and you almost had to seek that out. That wasn't something as a GP that you had to do as part of your, exams and everything else to become a GP. It helps us understand. It helps us almost not blame the GPs. Like, it's not their fault, that it's a systematic, it's a bigger problem, right? It's not just blame, oh, my doctor doesn't know this. It's not about that. It's about the fact that we need to do better all over. But it's so refreshing. And how do you feel kind of being candid and being honest about that, look, I didn't know that. I do now, but I didn't know that. Have you had any negative responses to that?
No, I mean, I do think it's kind of like a basic tenet for life. Like, honesty is the best policy, and being open to learning new things. It doesn't matter whether it's medicine, but particularly in medicine and science, we know such a small amount about how the human body works. To be so arrogant as to say we know it all already. And there's something in our medical training, like, we're thrown in at the deep end for most of us in our early 20s. We've got, I was thinking about this the other day, we're really put on the front line of managing some of the sickest patients, or certainly we were when I was a junior doctor. And you did almost need a bit of that arrogance to sort of get you through that war zone of being on call, being on your own, dealing with these really ill people, dealing with families when you were, you're only a baby yourself in your early 20s with little life experience, never mind experience as a medical doctor. So I think there's something wrong in training, not just our medical training, not just that we weren't taught, but also that that trauma kind of makes you a little bit arrogant as a defense mechanism. And it takes a lot of confidence to be able to say, I don't know. And, and that's a really interesting point that you're bringing to me. And I'm happy to go and read up about that rather than saying, well, if I don't know about it, it can't possibly be true. I think there's almost a maturity and a confidence that allows doctors to be able to be honest and say, that's an interesting point. And in that, it's something we're going to have to pivot to anyway, because with AI, in a very short time, patients will be able to just put into their personalized app, they'll have all of their wearable data. The AI is already able to search such a vast library of research that it is going to be the situation that the average patient will be able to come in with knowledge and a data set that is going to challenge us as doctors. So we have to be able to be honest and to work as partners and not be defensive about the educated patient. It's medicine is changing, and I think we have to be able to embrace that, and that's the way it's going to be like that. So you're either going to have to love it or you're going to have to exit stage left.
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe you've just said that. That's such an interesting point. And I think, again, it's just so refreshing to hear a doctor say that, because doctors will always say, oh, don't Google it. That's the worst thing you can do, right? And so now what we've seen is women have kind of been backed into a corner where they've kind of had to diagnose themselves. They've had to, and they're going back to their doctors. The message is, and we always send out this message, you have to advocate for yourself. And advocating for yourself means educating yourself and not taking no for an answer when you know something's wrong, because you know yourself better than anybody. But you're really talking, again, really honestly, and saying, well, you can actually educate yourself on these things and come in to the doctor with, hey, look, and here's my symptom chart, and here's what I've learned, and this is what I think it is.
Sure, then see, I would always say, well, sure, you've probably done half my job for me. And it doesn't necessarily mean, what you've got from Dr. Google or from AI is correct. And AI, unfortunately, is relying on the data that is there. And there's huge gender bias in the data because of the lack of research into female health. So I'm certainly not suggesting that AI will give a bang on diagnosis, but it's actually, even in the past 6 months, the changes in when I use AI as a search, it is already, it's exponential what it's doing.
Yeah.
But I love, there's a brilliance, it's used in various posters and things like that. But, the doctor saying, don't confuse your Dr. Google with my 6-year medical degree and 10 years training. And the patient replying, well, don't confuse your 1-hour lecture on my condition with my 20 years of living with my body.
Wow.
So I think you really can't, that's what we've done. We've really undervalued a person's lived experience and their ability to lean into their symptoms. And it's really a huge amount, especially for GPs, a huge amount of diagnosis is in listening. And that's particularly pertinent in something like perimenopause, menopause, PMDD. There isn't a diagnostic test yet. I don't know if there ever will be, or actually if there even needs to be, because a lot of it is about listening and trying to work out, which of these symptoms are hormonal, or could they be something else, and excluding other things, whilst always in a woman, so much of female illness or symptoms probably does have a hormonal basis, whether it's estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, or cortisol, or, insulin. These are really key players in our cellular health. And something has happened in menopause medicine. I don't understand why there's such friction, because my training was very much lean into what the patient's asking you and listen to them. At no point was it shut them down or that isn't how we were trained. So I'm confused why there's such friction in menopause.
I think maybe because there wasn't enough education around it, and so therefore the doctors didn't know the answers and so therefore
so it's bringing up that defensiveness.
I mean, to be quite honest, would you agree with me if I said I think women in general, so we're not just blaming the doctors here, women in general have been kind of conditioned to dismiss their own symptoms. So if we look at the fact that it's a very real to consider that at 35 you might be entering into perimenopause, and that would actually be considered very normal. But as you know, at 35 you could also be like I was, and I am now, I'm 40, looking after young children, but also looking after older parents. And so you're kind of, exhausted. And so if I'm exhausted, I'm saying, oh, I'm exhausted, but it must be because of the kids, and the kids were off last week and it's because of that. You very easily dismiss your own symptoms, very easily. We never kind of say, hang on a second, this isn't normal, until you get to the depths of and you're really, so women have almost been conditioned to do that. And then doctors were maybe doing that as an extension of that because they didn't know. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's a good girl, just be quiet. We're conditioned to be a good girl, and that means don't complain about anything, so we don't, we what we tolerate in terms of what people do to us is really high. And we also put up with quite a high level of internal discomfort, which, we see that in perimenopause, menopause. We see that in heavy menstrual bleeding. There's some really good figures there that 70% of women who have got flooding heavy periods will not go to the doctor for a long time. So there's really shocking figures. So, and then in terms of women getting diagnosed with their perimenopause or menopause, it takes on average up to 10 appointments. That's from UK figures. But the language that women use when they come to see me, like, I'm sorry for bothering you, it's probably nothing, I don't want to waste your time. I mean, those are phrases that you don't hear so typically from men. So there's definitely a conditioning of sucking it up, which we need to really get rid of that from an early age, getting girls to be confident in their voice, being confident in when they're experiencing discomfort, saying that's not okay. And that goes across so many areas in life, whether that's consent or, dealing with the healthcare professionals. The second thing is in the difference between male and female healthcare. We talk about this biopsychosocial model. And in female healthcare, we've really forgotten that women are biological creatures. We've really focused on this psychosocial. So a lot of things become psychological symptoms or social symptoms, like your sandwich generation of looking after the older parents and the teenage kids, and actually forgetting about the biology of what's going on in that person at the same time. So the irony is, if somebody goes into premature menopause or POI in their 20s, they experience the same symptoms as a woman who goes into menopause in her 40s, and the girl in her 20s doesn't have teenage kids and elderly parents, but she has exactly the same brain fog, anxiety and hot sweats. So there's real gaslighting of it must be the social environment. When you manage women correctly, they get back to spinning their 20 plates very effectively.
Yeah, and you've mentioned the word gaslighting there, and sometimes I shy away from using that because again, I'm doing it here. I was going to say sometimes it feels a bit over dramatic, but no, it's not. That is kind of exactly what has happened to women. And so we shouldn't shy away from using that term because it kind of is exactly what's happening. You've mentioned PMDD a couple of times, and I wanted to get into that a little bit with you. I've had quite a lot of GPs that I've spoken to, not on the podcast, but just in general, that don't know what PMDD is. Genuinely, that is a real thing. Like last year, I spoke to about 3 different doctors that didn't know what it was. Why is this? So what is PMDD, and why don't a lot of GPs know about it? Has your body ever done something weird or out of the norm? You've already went to the doctor, you've had your blood test, but you're still thinking, is this normal? Am I the only one that's dealing with this? Sometimes you just need to hear it from someone who actually gets it. And that's literally why we've created the House of Hormones Forum. Think your girls' group chat, but with an upgrade. The House of Hormones Forum is a safe space with zero judgment and a strong community of women who really get what you're going through, because they're going through it too. We're talking PMS, mood swings, cycle changes, cravings, all of it. And the best part is you've got real support with the House of Hormones Forum. So whether you just want to vent or you've come to ask questions, come and join us. It's given science meets sisterhood, so come and join the conversation at the House of Hormones Forum. We've saved you a seat. www.thehouseofhormones.com and just click forum.
So PMDD stands for premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and it is a severe form of premenstrual mood disruption which affects your function. So there's very specific criteria, but I would say at a basic level, it's where your mood dips so much that you're struggling to go to school, you're struggling to go to work, you're not able to maintain your relationships with the key people in your life. It can be so severe that you can actually develop a monthly psychosis. So you can actually develop a psychotic illness every 4 weeks, and that's pretty rare. It affects up to about 8% of women, so it's not an insignificant number of women.
Wow.
And almost 20% of women almost meet the criteria. So that's 1 in 5 women have PMS that's so bad that they're almost meeting this PMDD criteria. So really common, and it's associated with really high levels of self-harm, high levels of attempted suicide. So about 1 in 3 women with PMDD have thought about taking their own life. So it is a significant and severe mental health condition that only got onto the ICD-10, which is the as you know as a psychologist, but the psychiatric and disease classification manual in 2011. So it wasn't really recognized. Really, affect a woman both, in terms of low mood, but also even, rage and criminal behavior. So scary. And it's hormonal, obviously. It's premenstrual, and it's about changing levels of hormones in your brain because your brain's so hormone sensitive.
How would you, as a doctor, approach, so say a perimenopausal woman, how would you know the difference and how would you distinguish the difference between PMDD and potential symptoms of perimenopause?
So PMDD classically will be in that a week before your period and maybe for the first couple of days, and the symptoms resolve really quickly after your period comes. So that's how it's defined. So you could certainly, and some women can only develop PMDD in perimenopause or after they've had a child. For others, it's there from their very first period. So there's definitely something that makes your brain sensitive to those hormones. So it might be that your brain is sensitive from the start of menstruation at menarche, or it might only happen after your brain's been sensitized in a pregnancy, or it might happen after a trauma, or as you go into perimenopause when the hormone levels really start to fluctuate. So you're differentiating the perimenopause. Those symptoms tend to be present across the whole cycle. They can still be worse, at different points, but PMDD classically, you're fine maybe for the other 2 to 3 weeks.
And I really don't think many people would know that, what you've just spoken about. So the fact that puberty, it could all start at puberty and you could have PMDD. And the problem is so many things can be misdiagnosed as different things. So because you could think it's postnatal depression, or you could think it's, and so it's so important what you've just said, that having a baby could be a trigger. Perimenopause could be a trigger, but really what you're looking for is the definition between the mood change being so dramatic at those times. And the only way you can really do that, there's no blood test that can tell that. There's no sitting with a doctor for ages that can tell that. It's basically symptom tracking, right?
So it's really a big thing is, again, leaning into your symptoms and tracking your symptoms is so useful, really getting a sense of what's going on for you. There's some good trackers there. There's Me versus PMDD. There's a daily symptom score as well on that website. And just start, and the great thing about where we are now in time is that there are wonderful tracking devices and apps that really allow you to get a sense of yourself. And I think younger women and girls are so much better at following when their period is, looking at what their mood's like, and being able to start to see a pattern. And that can be really validating because there are good treatment options, both pharmacological, but also really looking at nutrition and exercise and things like that. And there's certain people are much more prone to PMDD, really important for neurodivergent girls and women. So we know they often don't receive their diagnosis until much later in life. So we think maybe about 2/3 of women don't get diagnosed probably until their late 30s or 40s, because girls are good girls and they suck it up and they mask, and they're much more likely to suffer from reproductive mood disorders like PMDD, postnatal depression. So I would see a lot of women who are only getting their ADHD diagnosis in their 40s because perimenopause has made the wheels fall off, and then they come in and then there's their 14-year-old daughters coming in the next day and she goes, actually, I think she's maybe got PMDD. So I have a lot of families where I look after different life stages, maybe the postmenopausal granny, the perimenopausal mummy, and the granddaughter with the PMDD, because these things do have a genetic basis as well, so I'm looking after all of the different people, who've got very similar, where actually the biology is very similar. It's about this brain sensitivity to to changing hormone levels, which explains why there is an increased incidence of psychological conditions in females.
Well, and I wanted to ask you about that, about perimenopause and the psychological conditions. So in your experience, how does perimenopause impact mental health, and why is it crucial to address that connection?
So the huge thing probably I think the central thing that I have learned, or think is the most important thing for women to know, is that ovarian hormones are brain hormones. So we produce these hormones from our ovaries, estrogen, progesterone and testosterone, but we actually also produce them in our brain. But when the ovarian hormones start to go chaotic, they really affect all of our key neurotransmitters in our brain. And these are the circuits that really determine how we think, how we feel, how we learn, how we behave. It's serotonin, dopamine, GABA, glutamate, estrogen, progesterone and testosterone are in there pulling the puppet strings of all of those circuits. So it makes sense, obviously, then when the hormone levels start to change, that those neurotransmitters, are no longer regulated the way they should be. But 80% of women will get psychological symptoms at some level in perimenopause, whether that's insomnia, anxiety, loss of joy, which is a horrible one, anhedonia, just feeling that the color's gone out of the world. And that's different to depression. And antidepressants often make that worse. And at the minute, certainly, we've just had a big report out on overprescribing of antidepressants in Australia, particularly overprescribed in women. And unfortunately, the article didn't make any mention of hormones. But, in Australia, about a quarter of women in midlife are on antidepressants and less than 15% are on HRT. Yet I guarantee a huge number of those women are actually just by age, they're in perimenopause, and nobody's thinking to give them a bit of a hormonal treatment instead, which is a tragedy. And it is a tragedy because it's a high risk time for suicide. So it's so important to have hormones at the front of your mind as a healthcare professional.
And it is a tragedy, you're absolutely right, because when we think of the generations that this has affected, I mean, it's great for you and I to sit here today talking about this, because we know and we're confident that it's going in the right direction and there is change. And, so when I think about my daughter, like, I'm hopeful that things will have changed so much. I mean, we're even seeing research coming out. You might have seen it yourself, and I'm laughing, but it's exciting that it's like, well, menopause could be optional, so we're starting to see headlines like this because of the research
I have to say that sounds horrific. I have to say.
But I'm just saying the excitement at even these headlines, because it's coming into the common domain, it's becoming a topic that is important and there's research being put into it. So that's what's really exciting about it. But it is a tragedy for the generations prior. And I mean, the statistics that you've just mentioned of people being on antidepressants and misdiagnosed and being on antidepressants. One of the things I do want to talk to you about HRT, but I had a conversation. He literally said the words to me, and this is, like I said, it was a great conversation. He was fantastic. He was just giving me his experience, and he said, it's so easy. Men can actually just test themselves. It's an over-the-counter test. They can come in. There we go. Bish, bash, bosh. Job done. And when we think about the year...
I would disagree with that. I would say, in my experience, men with low testosterone get almost an equally bad hand as women. So in Australia, very difficult for men to get anybody to check their testosterone and to get testosterone prescribed. In Australia, it is still an area, I would say, of health equity or equal health inequity. That is just still difficult.
That's so
for men in Australia to get
in LA, and he did do a disclaimer and say, "Look, I'm based in LA." He said he's seen a huge shift, and it's almost cool there. Like, men are almost proactive, and before they even need to, they're checking their testosterone levels. It's become a trendy thing to do.
Yeah.
That's in LA. not Australia or the UK.
That's how it should be. That it shouldn't be just because it's trendy or it's because it's in probably one of the most health literate populations in the world with access to a lot of, high level preventative medicine. I would say for the majority of men, they're still not getting their testosterone checked. It's well established that low testosterone is associated with osteoporosis, depression, dementia, diabetes. I wonder what else is associated with that in women. It's exactly the parallels are, not even funny.
Okay, so maybe not all around the world that they're so open to being diagnosed. But my point is, at diagnosis, that was what was frustrating me. So at diagnosis, it was really easy and they just give them testosterone. Yeah, for women, as you've talked about, will then be misdiagnosed with antidepressants or, like it's a whole rigmarole. Women have to go to get HRT. They have to have at least 10 appointments before we even start. We've seen all the statistics and we've seen all this. So it was really, even though it was great what he was saying, it was actually really frustrating as well, because it was like, but why are we so far behind with giving women HRT? And we know why, because of the reports and the cancer reports, etc., and the misleading articles that have come out. But how do you approach discussions about HRT with your patients, and what's your stance on it?
Often the elephant in the room for a lot of women is the fear of breast cancer being associated with HRT. So the publication and the misreporting of the WHI back in 2002 did a really good job of scaring women off estrogen. And I do think that was possibly their primary aim when the way that all panned out. Well, so this was the most expensive study, in women's health. It was really to make up for, the complete neglect of women's health research. The first female director of the National Institutes of Health came on board in the late 1990s, and they commissioned this $1 billion study to look to see if HRT would reduce cardiovascular disease in older women, on average age 63, who had no hot flushes or night sweats, which is also, there's an issue with that, and then compared them to a placebo group who actually were given a better diet than the average American. So they weren't actually placebo. And the HRT that they used was the horse's estrogen and an old synthetic progestin, which we do know is associated with breast cancer. So this trial was pottering on, and they used to meet every 6 months and go through the findings. And I think by all intents accounts, it was pretty a dull meeting. But in 2002, there was a wee bit of excitement, and a small group of researchers announced to the other 80, like it's a huge group of researchers. So a small group said, oh, by the way, we're actually stopping the study. HRT causes cancer. We've decided, me and Bob and Sue and the rest of the researchers asked if they could see the data that supported this quite huge epiphany. And when they looked at the data, like back of a matchbox, the other statisticians, they said this isn't actually statistically significant, which means it could have occurred by chance. You can't put that information out to the public. It will really devastate women's health, and doesn't look to be true. And the small group said it's too late. It's already with the Journal of American Medicine. And they literally got somebody on a bicycle and tried to rewrite the press release, but it was too late. It was in print, and the world's media was already primed to receive it. So it just seemed so contrived. So you have to remember, this trial was about whether HRT would reduce heart disease. Now, back in 2002, the biggest selling drug in the world was statins. So this is a $1 billion industry. So if HRT had been shown to reduce heart disease, that would really have affected a lot of people's profit balance sheet. And if you're confused about why things happen, it usually helps to follow the money. So this is how I explain the breast cancer risk to women. So in 2002, somebody's money was threatened. It's always about money. So 2002, they released that study. There was a small increased risk of breast cancer that was not actually statistically significant. Long-term follow-up showed that estrogen on its own reduces the risk of breast cancer by 23%. That didn't hit the headlines, and it showed that HRT, even in women who start at close to menopause under the age of 60, reduces your risk of early death by 23%. So Doesn't make headlines. Bad news
Sorry, can you
sells and
just,
it sticks.
I'm really sorry. Can you just repeat that one for us, for the people in the back?
So, so estrogen on its own reduces the risk of breast cancer by 23%. Now, to be fair, that's the horse's estrogen. So even horse's estrogen is not that bad. There's a small increased risk when you use synthetic progesterone, like medroxyprogesterone, which nobody really uses. And it's about an extra 1 in 1,000 cases per year. And it reduces all-cause mortality, reduces fractures, and in women who start it close to menopause, it also reduces.
Isn't this crazy? Isn't it?
Better than a statin.
Isn't it absolutely crazy? And
Just money.
when you're, thank you so much for telling that story in such a great way, so many people can actually understand it, because I know you're telling your patients that, but so many people don't have access to a doctor that knows that and is able to tell it with such confidence. So thank you for telling that. Isn't it crazy that as you're saying all these things, even when you're talking about hip replacements and you're talking about people on this medication, that I can think of so many women in my life alone that have had these things or are on those medications. And it's just so sad. Like, it's so sad that we've got to this place, but it does feel exciting. You've co-founded Healthy Hormones to support both clinicians and patients. Can you share a little bit more about what your goal is for that? So, you've got a doctor's appointment coming up and you're just trying to figure out what the hell is going on with your body. You need our free symptom tracker. It's like the receipts folder for your hormones. You can track the bloat, the mood swings, the brain fog, the mystery acne, and then roll it all into your next appointment like a hormonal pro. No more being brushed off or told it's all in your head. You've got the data. Download it for free today from our website and start advocating for yourself. www.thehouseofhormones.com and head to our free download section.
Yeah, so we're really excited. It's been a labour of love for about 15 months now, and it stemmed from our like a group of us, our own need as doctors to have a place where we could discuss menopause, perimenopause, PMDD, because a lot of it isn't written in guidelines because of the lack of research, and still a lot of fear in even, the same stuff gets, regurgitated a lot of the time. And we realized there is a whole network of professionals who are desperate to do better. Like, we want to do better by our female patients. So it was really to create what has turned out to be a collaborative brains trust. So we've got people from all different disciplines, different GPs, different specialists, allied health professionals, a lot of psychologists, physiotherapists, exercise physiologists. So people all coming with very different lived clinical experiences, which is fabulous, because a lot of that you just can't get out of AI or Dr. Google. So that real personal clinical expertise, which is often devalued in research, but clinical experience is so valuable, especially when you start to see patterns. So we've got this wonderful community where you can ask complicated questions, discuss cases, and just get that peer support. It should exist in every discipline in medicine. It would save so much stress and hassle for patients. And then on our public side, it's a community forum for women to ask questions, which is moderated and medically moderated, so that they can, walk the walk with somebody else. There's nothing like being connected to somebody else who's experiencing what you're experiencing. Feeling validated is so huge, even before we talk about treatment. So, and then we've got resources there that are evidence-based, that you can use and allow you to get a bit more educated, empowered and confident and able. It is ridiculous that you have to advocate for yourself, but to be able to advocate for yourself, when you go to seek treatment. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's such an exciting project that you're working on and so needed. We've mentioned AI, we've mentioned Google. In terms of social media, how are you finding social media for women's health? So, because obviously there's two sides to it, isn't there? Social media has become a platform for health education. A lot of the time it's misinformation and we know clickbait and things like that. But how do you utilize the platform, and why has it become actually quite a powerful tool for women's health?
So I think the big thing about social media is, on the positive side, is that it allows a lot of people to have a voice. It allows people to, talk about things they wouldn't talk about if they had their face attached, if people knew who they were. So that can be a good thing, can also be a bad thing, you know, because you lose your accountability. Certainly for medical professionals, like all of the doctors and myself who are on there, we do have to still maintain our professional integrity on there. So I have to behave on social media exactly as I would behave in a consultation room. So I'm not going to post anything that I don't believe to be true. That doesn't mean it mightn't change with time, but I'm very careful to only say things that I know has evidence. And that would be true of all of the social media doctors that I would be connected with. They do this in their own time. It is very much a passion project for most of them to elevate that awareness. And most of them are doing it, you know, themselves. They're not using, you know, a social media person to run their accounts. It really is their own personal time, their personal knowledge and care for people. So I think that's the great side. The downside is, like everybody on social media, you can waste too much life on there. And I think you can forget to live your life. And there's a negative thing, you know, even just the blue light is bad for our hormones. So really important that you really do restrict how much time you spend on any screen time, particularly social media, because it does have a lot of negative mood effect.
I always find that really interesting because although when you do go into a doctor's office, they will say, do you have a balanced diet? And you'll say, yes, you know, of course I eat well. Even if you don't, you probably say yes, right? But why is that? We know now nutrition is a huge part of everyone's health. So men's health, women's health, but we know it's huge, especially in perimenopause. The things that I've learned and the courses that I've now gone on nutrition. Why is that not a bigger thing for doctors to lean into? Obviously, it might be for you, but I mean across the board.
Well, once again, totally absent from our training. We didn't get taught anything about nutrition in any depth, like a cursory bit, and still it would have been about, and still it would be incorrect because it would have been like high fat is bad when we know that actually, you know, good fats are still a very important part of our diet. So a lot of medical education, I would say, is driven by the pharmaceutical industry. So teaching us to a certain point where there was a drug to prescribe and much more reactive, so fixing things once they were broken, whereas we really need to pivot to a preventative model. And you know, nutrition and real food is medicine. It has hugely powerful properties and something that we should be investing in.
It does feel like such a simple thing. And I feel like women, a lot of the time, going back to the social media thing, feel really overwhelmed. So it's like, right, I've got to get my 10,000 steps and I need to eat X amount of protein and I need to do this. But realistically speaking, it's not that hard. You do just need to get in the habit of it. And what I would say is choose one of those things and focus on one of those things. Like just focus on one. Don't try and do it all because you're never going to do it. So try one and then introduce another one and then introduce another one. So tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are on balance and that type of thing. Like, have we messed it all up if you went crazy and had wine and chocolate and cheese and whatever else?
No, I mean, I think it's, you know, you're aiming for, like everything, you're aiming for a balanced diet, but small amounts here and there are not going to devastate your metabolism. You know, so if you've got a really strong foundation, it can have a wee wobble every now and again, but if you throw an earthquake at it on a weekly basis, then it's definitely there's going to cracks will appear. So, you know, trying to, and I think, you know, keep it simple, like, you know, trying to start your day with a good breakfast. You know, a lot of this is basic stuff that your granny would have said. Like my mum laughs when I talk about nutrition. She goes, that's just how you eat. And I talk about time restricted eating. She goes, that's just sleeping, you know, so stop giving it fancy names. You know, and everybody's got their weighted vest. Well, she climbs a mountain with a backpack and a flask of tea, so she knows she's got her weighted vest on at 75 up the mountains every week. She's like, yeah, she's like, I'm all over the weighted vest. I've been doing that since I was 20. So yeah, so keeping it really, you know, finding stuff that you can do. So like you said, like sort of habit stacking, make it easy, try and have a real breakfast in the morning, you know, porridge with loads of nuts and seeds, if that's your thing, or a couple of eggs. Or if you really are somebody that only likes a smoothie, try and like easy lunches, like eat the same thing for lunch every day. You know, I'm a mad frittata eater, or like a tin of tuna and salad. It doesn't need to be, you know, exciting. And you know, and even if you do work with other people, you know, sharing your lunches, you know, maybe trying to get somebody to make a few lunches so you don't have to make lunches every day.
Yeah.
And just so it is worth trying to really think about eat more protein and eat more fiber. And then it's rather than eat less chocolate and drink less. So really trying to eat more good stuff rather than less bad stuff, I think is a much more healthy psychological approach to anything. And like I get up every morning, I do half an hour of exercise before I go to work. My daughter's hair is probably the worst hair in the school, but something's got to give.
That's good.
So if I don't get my exercise in, I'm not going to be a good doctor. If her hair doesn't look perfect, it doesn't matter, so try, so there's things will have to give. I definitely think being really careful. We're time poor, I think, because of technology. So really, set limits on your phone so it's off, so that you're not losing valuable time that you could be doing something more useful. Because I think that's probably one of the things that really does eat into our available time that we could be doing better stuff with, is definitely those wee square evil things that are attached to your hand.
That's such a good tip. It really is. And it's definitely something I need to be more mindful of. I mean, I'm actually setting an alarm for
Oh yeah, I'm talking to myself.
Yeah, I'm actually a new tip that I'm trying to start. So it's not because we're sitting here claiming that we do it all. No, I'm actually going to set an alarm for myself, which is the time to no more screens. So TV off, whether you lie and think or read or whatever it is, that's fine. But there's no phones, no TV. Yeah. And I'm going to set an alarm because if I'm watching something, I can't switch it off. And you know what it's like. What big myth would you love to debunk today?
Have you been feeling like your hormones are running the show? Been there? Same. Our ebook is your no BS glow up guide to hormonal health. We're talking facts, expert advice, and real life hacks, all in one gorgeously written download. So whether you're dealing with PMS, perimenopause, or you're just tired of Googling what the hell is wrong with me, grab your copy now at www.thehouseofhormones.com, and we've tagged it below. We've got your back.
I would use body identical hormones in teenagers who've got PMDD. And I've used it successfully in women with postnatal depression. I have teenagers who have primary ovarian insufficiency, and they're patients that were on my books before I became interested in hormones. So I expect a lot of GPs will have quite young women who are already in a perimenopause or a premature menopause or POI, and they haven't spotted them. So I think that's one of the biggest myths, and we need to really put in female health, we need to put hormones central, both for managing current well-being, particularly in the mental health space, but also considering optimizing hormonal health through different measures, not just HRT, but really putting that central for future health and disease prevention. So you're never too young to think about hormones. You're probably not, from their teenage years, hormones can be part of your treatment. And that can be, but that optimization can be through different things like food, like exercise, like sleep, social connection, breathing, as well as actually using hormones pharmacologically as well.
That's amazing. Honestly, that's such amazing advice, and that will help so many people here who don't have doctors that are maybe on that wavelength, and it'll help them maybe be able to advocate for themselves and say, why are we not thinking about this? And I just really love the way you keep using the word optimize, because I think the word normal has been used and overused in women's health, and every single woman listening to this will have overheard the word normal. And so I think the word optimal and optimizing is just so refreshing to hear you sit here and use that. It's so lovely. Listen, Dr. Ceri, thank you so much.
Yeah, you've only got one life. You want it to be the best one.
And this is it, right? So why are we all settling for normal? Even when, listen, I'm talking about blood tests coming back normal, and that means nothing, as we've all established. So it's here nor there. But even the word normal, can we just shake it off, go for optimal, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I want the best.
Thank you so, so much. It's been such a pleasure to speak to you today. And even your last bit of advice right up to the end of this conversation is just so inspiring. Everything that you're doing is so inspiring. Is there anything just to end on that you're excited about the future of women's health?
I think we have got this wonderful community of women. That's what women do best, is that they talk to each other and they support each other and they're out advocating for each other. We need more men involved because, you know, they do have a louder, deeper voice that seems to carry further. But I think women working together, supporting each other, lifting each other up, like everybody benefits. So, you know, be there for your friends, for your family. And, you know, if you are, and remember, like, use your woman in your life. If you're struggling to advocate for yourself, you know, grab a friend, you know, grab your mum, your sister, and bring them to the doctors with you. Because I always say that's my best tip for getting what you want, is bring somebody with you to see your GP, because we get really scared when two women come into the room.
That's brilliant. That's such good advice to end on. Oh, you're absolutely amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ceri, and I hope you will come back and join us on the House of Hormones another time.
No, I really enjoyed chatting to you. That was absolutely gorgeous.
If you enjoyed this episode today, don't forget to like and subscribe to the House of Hormones podcast. Your support really does help us reach more people and spread the word about women's health. If you want to stay connected, follow us on our social media. And here's something really important. We're on a mission to secure more funding for women's health initiatives. Sign our government petition today and help us amplify our voices for better healthcare resources and support. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you for being part of our journey. We can't wait to see you in the next episode.